Her granddaughter called her Mama Lipa, and I called her that too. Under 5 feet tall, with a bent back, and a skin so wrinkled by the sun, with her hair pulled back into a tight gray bun, she looked like where she came from, a rural town in El Salvador. She had lived her whole life there, but Mama Lipa was different than the other Tehuantepeques. She had been married to an Englishman, an engineer who had come to the country to build hydroelectric projects. She had visited her daughter, who lived in Berkeley, California, and she still spoke some English. We were sitting at Mama Lipa's solar, that outdoor living area that's in most all Salvadorian homes. We were drinking tea. It was mint with some bitter bark. She claimed that she'd been drinking it her whole life and that it was good for the blood. Well, she was 70 plus years old in a country where at that time, the average age of a rural Salvadoreña was 50 years. Maybe there was something to that drinking of that bitter tea. I put in a spoonful of raw cane sugar. It was okay. We were asking her about her life as a young woman. She didn't want to speak too much about her relationship with her husband, the father of her daughter, and there we sat, her granddaughter and I, and we listened as she told us the one thing that she was most afraid of were cars and trucks and buses, for she had seen some horrific accidents in her day. And then she reached down into the apron that all Salvadoreños wear, and she pulled out a chunk of metal. It was an imán, a magnet. And that magnet she had carried in her pocket for over 50 years. She truly believed that that magnet kept cars and buses and trucks away from her. I smiled and nodded and thought to myself, well, magnets attract metal, not repel. But there she was, sitting at the table. Maybe there was something to that magnet. When we asked further about her particular affairs, she was not forthcoming, but she said, I do know a story that happened when I was a young girl, and I will share that with you now. There was a man and his wife, an elderly man, for their children had all moved off to the cities in search of work. They lived out on the outskirts of our town here in Tehuantepec. And he and his wife would collect honey from bees, wild bees, that he captured in the forest, and he kept them then inside of hollowed logs in his yard. Now one day, this man set out into the forest in search of some wild hives to capture and bring home. They had a fairly good business with this honey. It was their sole source of income. That day he headed off into the forest and he saw a blue-winged bird with a yellow beak. And he knew that this bird did frequent around the places where you found honey hives. And so he began to follow the bird through the forest. And he continued on and soon realized that he was in parts of the forest that he was not all that familiar with. But he kept following the bird, and then all of a sudden the bird disappeared. and he looked about in the trees, and there were no honey hives. He was tired and thirsty. As he looked about, he saw that there was a moss-covered rock, and there was a thin stream of water running down that moss-covered rock and made a pool, 2 feet across at the most. But it was clear. You could see the bottom, stones. Must be fresh. He reached down with his hand and he scooped up some water, drank it. Another time, maybe another time. Refreshed, he stood up and started making his way back out of the forest. As he walked along, he felt that something was changed. His step was more lively. And when he looked down, he saw that his shirt, his muscles were bulging up like they used to when he was younger. And then he felt his hair, he pushed it back, and he had a full head of hair where he'd been starting to get bald. And then he felt his face, and it was smooth. All those sun-edged wrinkles were gone. When he reached the home, he opened up the door and walked right in, and his wife gave out a great shriek, "Who are you, and get out of my house?" "Well, it's your husband." She looked closer, and yes, it was her husband. But he looked about 20 years, looked like he was 20 years old. "What happened to you, husband?" And he told her about how he was out in the forest and he drank this water, and there must have been something very special, almost magic in this water, because now look at him. He was as young as he was when he was 20. "Well, I can't have this," the wife said. "Those girls down in the plaza, when they see you, they're going to be chasing after you, and I can't trust you to keep your hands to yourself. I'm going to have to become like you." The husband told her where he had found that pool of water. And off she went in a great hurry into the forest. And he waited. Then he waited. And she did not return. He became quite worried as the sun was going down. It was going to become dark soon. There's no place to be in the forest after dark. And so he headed off toward that pool of water. And when he got there, she was nowhere to be seen. But down there in the soft mud around the pool, he could see footprints, small, her size foot. Why, she had been there. She must be on her way back. She must have gotten a bit lost. I'll go and find her. And he's just starting to step away when he heard a cry. The cry of a baby. And he walked over into the tall grass, and there was a baby. And underneath the baby were his wife's clothes. And then he realized she had drank too much water, for now she was but an infant. He gathered her up and carried her back to the house. And, well, their love was great. And he did what he had to do. He would take care of her until she had grown old enough so that they were still young enough to enjoy the love that they had had for so many years. That's a little story I call The Beekeeper's Wife. And you know, Mama Lipa, she chuckled when she finished that story, and she looked at us with a twinkle in her eye and she said, "That's a true story. It happened when I was a child." Thank you.